A black adopted son, a missing page from a will, and a crooked lawyer with something to hide. What they didn't know, the walls had eyes, and the truth was coming. It was a sunny afternoon when Nathan stood outside the law office, clutching the funeral program of the woman who raised him. He was ready to grieve, not to fight. But when the lawyer read the will aloud, Nathan's name was nowhere to be found. His white siblings exchanged glances. The lawyer simply said, "I'm sorry, but your name wasn't included." But something didn't add up. And Nathan wasn't the type to stay silent. Nathan was 7 years old when he first walked through the doors of the Bennett home. A quiet boy with big, watchful eyes and a second-hand backpack slung over one shoulder. He didn't speak much. Not at first. He had already learned that silence was safer. That expectations came with consequences, that home could disappear in a blink, but something was different about Elena Bennett. She didn't rush to hug him like the well-meaning foster families before. She knelt down, looked him in the eye, and simply said, "You're safe here, Nathan. You're home." And for a while, he believed her. The Bennett family lived in a well-kept house on the edge of a sleepy suburban town. White picket fence, weekly barbecues, Sunday morning pancakes. It was picture perfect. But behind closed doors, it wasn't always so kind. The Bennett had two biological children. Mark, who was 9, and Jane, who was 11. From the beginning, they saw Nathan not as a brother, but as a stranger, a project, a reminder that their mother's love wasn't reserved for just them anymore. It started with little things. Mark refusing to share toys. Jane making sure Nathan knew which photos on the wall didn't include him. At school, they introduced him to friends as the kid were fostering. Even after the adoption papers had been signed, Nathan never raised his voice. Never talked back. He just tried harder. He stuttered until his eyes ADHD. He cleaned his room, the living room, sometimes even theirs. He learned how to cook, to mow the lawn, to smile through it all. Because deep down, he believed that if he was good enough, if he was helpful enough, they'd see him, too. Elena always saw him. She was the one who slipped extra cookies into his lunchbox, who sat at the edge of his bed and read him stories, until he fell asleep, who told him over and over again that he mattered, that he was loved, that no matter what, he would always have a place in her heart and in her will. It wasn't something she said lightly. She'd bring it up gently. Sometimes while folding laundry or sipping tea on the porch, "You don't have to worry, baby." She once told him, "I've made sure you're taken care of. Just like Mark and Jane, you're my son, too." Nathan never asked for it. He didn't need her money or her house. What he needed was the acknowledgement, the reassurance that he hadn't imagined the years, the bedtime stories, the birthday cakes with his name on them. But after Elena got sick, everything started to shift. The house grew quiet, tense. Mark and Jane visited less. And when they did, they hovered like vultures. Not around her bed, but around her belongings, whispering about the house, the jewelry, the stocks, as if their mother wasn't still breathing in the next room. Nathan stayed by her side. He read to her when her voice gave out. He brought her soup. He helped her sit up and combed her hair when her hands were too weak. And one day, when she couldn't sleep, she asked him to help install a small camera in her study, just to feel safer, she said. He didn't ask questions. He just did it. Because if anyone had earned his loyalty, it was her. When she passed, Nathan didn't cry in front of anyone. He stood at the funeral in a pressed black suit, surrounded by people who barely made eye contact. He held the folded program like it was glass and smiled politely at the condolences. But beneath that calm was something deeper, something heavier, because Nathan knew her promises, and he believed in them. What he didn't know, what he couldn't yet imagine was that someone else had been planning something very different. That behind the solemn words and polite handshakes, a betrayal was already in motion. One that would try to erase him from the family story altogether. But Nathan had learned to be patient, to pay attention, and when the time came, he'd be ready. The day they read the will, the sun was too bright. It streamed through the stained glass windows of the lawyer's office, casting colored patterns on the mahogany table. But there was no warmth in the room, just tension. Mark and Jane sat on one side, arms crossed, expressions already smug. Nathan sat alone on the other, his fingers laced, jaw tight. Mr. Johnson, the family's longtime lawyer, shuffled the papers like a magician preparing for a trick. He cleared his throat, gave a theatrical sigh, and said, "I regret to inform you. Your mother updated her will privately several weeks before her passing." Nathan blinked. "Updated? Privately? That can't be," he said, voice steady but uncertain. "She told me." Johnson held up a hand. "There is only one copy. This one." He slid a stapled set of papers across the table. It was witnessed by staff at her care facility. "Unfortunately, your name, Nathan, isn't included in the final distribution." Mark didn't even try to hide the smirk that tugged at the corner of his mouth. Jane glanced sideways at Nathan, almost pitying. But not quite. Not really. It was all there in black and white. The house, the accounts, the trust, everything. A split between Mark and Jane. Nothing for Nathan. Not even a mention. As though he'd never existed. As though he hadn't held her hand in her final hours. Nathan's mind reeled. No mention, not even one word. But his heart wasn't broken. It was suspicious because he remembered something. Something strange. 1 week before her death, when her body was frail but her mind still clear, his mother had asked him for help with something. "Nathan," she had whispered from her bed, "can you install one of those little cameras in my study? Just for peace of mind. Sometimes I think people might be going through my things." He hadn't questioned it. He'd simply done it. A small discreet lens tucked near the bookshelf where it couldn't be seen. No flashing light, no sounds, just a quiet eye watching. She never brought it up again, and in the chaos of her passing, it had slipped from his mind. But now, sitting at that table, watching Mr. Johnson lie with legal polish, Nathan remembered every detail, every cable he hid behind the molding, every password he set on the cloud account, every promise she had made him. He didn't argue, didn't cry. He simply stood up, nodded once, and said, "Thank you for your time." Mark chuckled. "Guess that charity case didn't pay off, huh?" Nathan turned, looked at him calmly, and replied, "We'll see." That night, the house felt emptier than ever. Nathan sat in his old room, still neat, still echoing with memories, and opened his laptop. He logged into the hidden account, the one tied to the camera feed. It had been weeks. Maybe nothing had been recorded. Maybe it had failed. But then the screen flickered to life. The glow from the laptop screen lit Nathan's face in the dark study. The only sound in the room, the soft hum of the cooling fan. His hands hovered over the mouse as the footage buffered slowly from the cloud. A weak signal, a weak heart, but a strong will, his mother's last gift to him. And then the footage began. It was dated 5 days before her death. The camera angle faced her desk from a top corner of the room, just like she'd requested. His mother sat there, her posture frail, but her voice steady. Alone in the room, she looked into the lens and began to speak. "This is for clarity," she said, her voice thin but firm. "My will states that everything I own should be divided equally among my 3 children. Yes, 3, Mark, Jane, and Nathan." Nathan's breath caught. "I know some may not agree. I know some never fully accepted him. But he is my son. He deserves as much as anyone else." She paused, coughing into a handkerchief. Then she reached into her drawer, pulled out a folder, and held it to the camera. "This is the signed will stated and witnessed. If anything happens to this document, know that I never changed my mind." The screen went dark for a second. Nathan leaned in. His heart was hammering now. Another video. Timestamped the next day. Mr. Johnson entered the room alone. Nathan watched, expression unreadable. The man moved like he belonged there, like he'd done it before. He opened the drawer, pulled out the same folder Nathan had just seen in the previous video, and slowly replaced it with another, thicker, newer, different. Then he tucked the original into his leather briefcase. But it wasn't just Mr. Johnson. Mark appeared in the doorway moments later. "Done?" he asked. Johnson nodded. "They won't question it." Nathan paused the video. For a long time, he didn't move. There was no outburst, no dramatic reaction, just a quiet, deadly calm. He clicked download, transferred the footage onto a flash drive. Then he closed the laptop, stood up, and reached for his jacket. It was time. Mr. Johnson looked up from his desk the next morning, not expecting to see Nathan walk through his door. The same office, the same false smile. But Nathan didn't take a seat this time. He simply walked up to the desk, pulled a small flash drive from his pocket, and placed it gently on the polished wood. "What's this?" Johnson asked. "Clarity," Nathan replied, his voice calm, almost soft. Johnson reached for the drive, but Nathan held up a hand. "Before you watch that, I suggest you think very carefully about the last time you were in my mother's study." Johnson froze. For a man who prided himself on composure, the shift in his eyes said everything. His mouth opened, then closed again. Nathan leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "She asked me to install a camera just for peace of mind," she said. "Turns out she was right to worry." Johnson swallowed hard. "I suggest you correct the will immediately before I send copies of that footage to the Bar Association, the police, and every news outlet in this city." Silence blanketed the room. Then Johnson nodded, stiff, robotic. He looked like a man who had just watched his own empire begin to crumble. Nathan didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He just turned around and walked out. He wasn't here for revenge. He was here for the truth. And now it was finally back in his hands. The Bennett family gathered in the lawyer's conference room, sunlight streaming through the tall windows as if mocking the tension in the air. The table was polished to a mirror sheen, and at the head sat Mr. Johnson, his fingers steepled like a man in control. Nathan stood at the far end of the table, silent, calm, the outsider again, except this time he was holding the truth. Mark leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, already smirking. Jane barely glanced at Nathan, busy scrolling through her phone, her eyes dull with indifference. To them, this meeting was a formality, a final stamp on a future they thought already belonged to them. But Nathan had something they didn't expect. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a flash drive. "I have something to show you," he said quietly. Johnson's fingers twitched. "Nathan, this really isn't the..." Nathan plugged the drive into the TV on the wall. The screen flickered to life. A grainy video filled the room. There she was, Elena Bennett, their mother, sitting in her study, speaking directly to the camera with a voice that was soft but resolute. "My will states that everything I own should be divided equally among my 3 children." Gasps rippled through the room. Jane dropped her phone. Mark sat forward, mouth slightly open, and Johnson turned pale. The video continued. Elena held up the will, showed the date named Nathan by name, clear, undeniable. Then the second clip played. Johnson entering the house alone. Johnson opening the drawer. Johnson switching the documents, and finally Mark stepping in asking done. The room went ice cold. Nathan stood still, arms at his sides, but his eyes were locked on Johnson like steel. "You stole my mother's voice," he said low and even. "You tried to erase me from her life, from her legacy." No one said a word. Johnson opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His face was drained of all color, his lips trembling. Jane whispered, "Oh my God." Mark stood up, but for once he had nothing clever to say. Nathan turned to face the rest of the room now. "She didn't just raise me, she chose me. And no lie, no document, no backroom deal is ever going to undo that." The door opened. 2 uniformed officers stepped into the room, called by the firm's paralegal the moment the footage started. "Playing Mr. Johnson?" one of them asked. The lawyer's voice cracked. This is a misunderstanding." But no one was listening anymore. The officers walked him out, one on each side, as he fumbled to explain, to justify, to escape. The will was officially declared tampered, invalid. A full investigation was launched. Criminal charges pending. Mark slumped back in his chair, stunned. Jane turned her face away, ashamed. And Nathan, he didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He just picked up the flash drive, placed it gently into his pocket, and walked to the door. "I didn't come for your apology," he said, pausing just long enough for them to hear it. "I came for justice." Then he left. Not just the room, but the shadow they tried to keep him in for years. And as the door clicked shut, behind him, the silence he left behind was louder than any scream. The seasons turned. Autumn laid gold and crimson across the town. The Bennett house remained, though quieter now. Its secrets finally dragged into the light. Nathan hadn't returned since that day at the lawyer's office. He didn't need to. Closure wasn't a place. It was a choice. He stood now beneath the warm sun outside a small brick building nestled between a church and a library. On the glass door was a hand-painted sign, Bennett Justice Fund. Inside there were no mahogany desks or leather chairs, just a clean space, 2 donated computers and a wall lined with books, legal guides, civil rights history, resources for those who never knew they had any power. Nathan walked in, nodded to the young woman at the front desk, a recent law school graduate he'd sponsored herself. "Anyone come in today?" he asked. She smiled. "A teen from South Briar thinks her adoptive uncle forged documents, wants help." Nathan nodded slowly. That story was all too familiar. This was why he did it. Not to get even. Not to prove something to the family that never fully claimed him, but to rewrite the story for someone else. Someone who might not be as lucky to catch the lie in time. Because the truth didn't scream. It didn't demand. The truth whispered and waited until someone chose to listen. He remembered what the judge said the day the original will was reinstated. "Mr. Bennett, you didn't just protect your rights. You reminded us all what justice looks like." But Nathan didn't see himself as a hero, just a man who refused to be erased. After the scandal broke, Johnson's firm collapsed under public scrutiny. Mark disappeared from social media entirely. Jane sent a letter months later, short, awkward, apologetic. Nathan hadn't replied, not because he was bitter, but because he didn't need to explain his existence anymore. His mother had already done that with her voice, her will, and her belief in him when no one else had it. Now her legacy lived through every document he reviewed, every injustice he helped undo, every scared, voiceless soul who walked through his door. As the sun shifted in the sky, Nathan leaned against the doorway. The street was quiet, peaceful, and then a small boy passed by with his father. The boy, no older than 7, paused to read the sign on the glass. "Bennett, Justice," he said out loud. His father smiled. "That place helps people who get cheated out of what's theirs." The boy blinked up at Nathan and gave a shy nod, then skipped off after his dad. Nathan stood still for a moment, a lump rising in his throat. This was belonging. Not being accepted because of blood, but being remembered because of impact. In a world that once tried to tell him he didn't matter, Nathan had answered the only way that mattered. Not with noise, but with proof. Because truth doesn't need permission. It just needs someone brave enough to carry it. If you enjoy this story, please like, comment and subscribe. Until next time, stay curious, who knows what story we will uncover next.